Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-Shirt in session. Today I'm going to be speaking with Matt Le Mare, who's a music therapist in the UK. Matt works with older adults who are experiencing dementia, as well as a range of private clients. He also trains music therapists at the University of Derby, where he first encountered compassion-focused therapy. He's now trained as a CFT practitioner, and he works with CFT and music alongside each other and blends those approaches to work with his clients. As a lover of music myself, I'm really keen to speak with Matt about this blend, CFT and music. And so I do hope you enjoy my conversation in session with my friend Matt Le Mare. Yes, well, welcome, Matt Le Mare, to Compassion in a T-Shirt in session. It's really delightful to have a chance to talk to you again. We spoke. I can't quite remember exactly when that would have been, but it would have been a few years ago. I think we were both interested in compassion and music, and perhaps what the relationship might be there, and so we had a great chat back then. But of course, you've done enormous amounts of work on this since then. So I'm really excited to get a chance to hear all about it.
Yeah, thank you, Stan. Just for the opportunity of meeting with you and discussing. It's wonderful, great. Really looking forward to this.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can update you because it was 4 years ago that we first. I reached out and you responded, and we met and talked, and yeah, that was really, really helpful. So I hope today will be helpful as well. Yeah, for everybody. Yeah, great.
Yeah. No, I think it's something that we can all kind of tap a little bit into in our own ways. I mean, I'm absolutely a lover of music, especially Beatles. That's one of my favorites.
Ah, great.
But not great on the instrument necessarily, but really, there are lots of ways I think that we can bring music in, isn't there? And of course, you're a sort of a music therapist and musician, I'm guessing. And I suppose that was where I was curious to begin our conversation, was just to hear a little bit of that part of you. What's music for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I think going into the work, I find it helpful to think of I'm a human being first, then a musician, and then a therapist. I find that really helpful. So music has been such an important part of my life. Oh gosh, and I think it is an important part of everybody's life. I mean, we treat our children like musical beings, don't we? We sing to them, we rock with them, we're melodic with them and harmonize with them. So I think from a very early age, we're all very musical. And then, so for me, my story is that I was really curious and captivated, enchanted by music from an early age, and learned to play the flute, which I still play. And then I developed into sort of playing with bands, improvising, a lot of sort of rock style music, influenced by the Beatles. And then I sort of broadened my horizons, continued to do that, and was writing synthesizer music. And then I went to India for a while with the intention of learning an instrument, to be immersed in a different culture, but also to learn an instrument. So it's been, very, very passionate about music. But then I started combining more sort of therapy and therapeutic work A very dear friend of mine tragically died of cancer at the age of 28, I think, leaving a daughter. And that really, shook my world. And I think from that point on, I didn't know it at the time, but I was very curious about tragedy. And from that, I enrolled in a course at Derby University, where an undergraduate program, and completed that, and that was in music and therapeutic music. And that's where I learned about music therapy. I'd never heard of it before. And from there, I trained as a music therapist. And actually, the day I learned that I'd passed and I would become this music therapist, I'd been wanting to be for 4 years. There was an email from Derby University saying, "Would you like to come and be interviewed for a job?" So I got that job, and I've been working there ever since. Yeah, great day.
That's an incredible series of events. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've been there for, gosh, it's coming up to 16 years now. I'm training music therapists at the moment, which is just fantastic. I love doing that. And that's 2 days a week, 3 days a week doing clinical work. So, yeah, that's sort of my musical journey. So that's what it is to me. It's so much part of my identity and my work and my leisure and my humanness. Yeah.
I love the word enchanted by music, is sort of how you phrased it. I wondered, can you speak more about that? What was that kind of like? That it feels like this heartfelt coming up feeling of just enchanted by this thing called music.
Yeah, enchanted or enveloped or tuned into, listened to, or, well, for me it's a sensory experience. And I think in terms of CFT, that's what's really interesting, is that there's, with the definition of compassion, the sensitivity to suffering in self and others. So the sensitivity is really key. And so the music for me is a sensory experience. So you can be sensitive to the sensory, which can be coming in, through speakers or instruments or someone's voice, and can be inward and inner experience. So I think it's probably, that it's that captivates people, that enchants, that attunes, that envelops people, or it sort of captures our humanness somehow. It expresses and communicates the deepest parts of human experience, because every culture in history has had music. I mean, you can't actually say that for art. It's music that's had that. And a good example of that is the hand. Because every culture has a 5-note scale, a pentatonic scale, and so it's really, really a fundamental human sensory experience. It's what you do with it, really, that the action that you take with the music, I feel, is where, for me, the compassion's really important.
That whole of body experience, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Comes along
exactly.
with music.
Yeah.
We just sense it just running through us, or flowing through us, perhaps. And it's interesting. We talk about the 3 flows of compassion, but there are sort of 3 flows of music, aren't there? We receive music in, and we express music out, and then within ourselves, there's absolutely a self-to-self music that plays.
I think you're onto something there, Stan.
Yeah, it's just this whole,
That's great.
whole of body, and it's you kind of like it's this almost a love affair, isn't it, with music in a way, and yet it's also it's also something so comforting and soothing, and yet so rousing sometimes. And
Yeah.
like you say, what we it's there. We just can't help but relate to it. And then the next bit, what might we do with that? What are the actions from there, or how might that music be, sort of experienced and then influencing of us?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think that's where, the idea of compassion itself was really exciting for me. When I trained as a therapist, a music therapist, I thought, this is it. This is so important to me. This is what I'm going to do, and this is what I've done. But then one day I was at Derby University and giving a lecture on compassion and music. And a member of the audience said, "Oh, that's really interesting. Have you heard of Paul Gilbert?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't. Obviously, I hadn't done my research, being at Derby University. And so I thought, all right, Paul Gilbert, I'll find out who that is." And and that led to the CFT training. And the idea of developing the compassion itself. So, just as you were saying, there's this, it's this innate human ability to be musical, and what you do with it. Well, it's a bit like one of my compositions at the moment is called Future Self, because it's all about developing the compassionate self through music. It's just what you choose to it. Daniel Baraboin, who's a conductor, famous conductor and pianist, he conducts a divan orchestra in Israel. He's getting the two sides to come together and play. And he says it's music is like a knife. You can cut the bread and share it with people, or you can stab somebody with something. So it's what you do with it. So that's where the compassion was so interesting to me, with the intention behind, which you often talk about in CFT, isn't it? The intention. But then also the developing the wisdom to use music, and to have the courage to use music, or the strength to use music, or the commitment to use music. Yeah, so that's where it sort of just, the CFT just tied so many things together for me. It was a fantastic experience. Yeah, so yeah.
That is a delightful story, Matt. You were teaching at Derby, and someone goes, "Oh, you happen to know Paul Gilbert?" I do like that. But anyway, you certainly shortly thereafter, knew all about him, and you did the training and stuff by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's interesting because you said intention, and like with CFT, we often think of compassion as a motivation too, and that in a sense, the idea there of motivation and music, I suppose, or what is the motivation of a particular, or as you said, intention of a particular piece. I mean, when we have a baby and they wake up at night, and they're upset, we sing to them, don't we, with a compassionate motivation, or certainly a caring motivation, or soothing motivation. The music is all about kind of really aids, supports, becomes this sort of expression of the compassionate motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. It's absolutely it. Yeah, and that's so fundamental to music therapy. And I know in CFT there's been quite a lot of research about music. Paul talks about it. The Compassionate Kit Bag with Kate Luker and Neil Clapton, they talk a lot about music. There's a lot of music in mindfulness and self-compassion, and but really that's for me is more like music in psychotherapy. Music therapy is just like you were saying, it's more like the child who's distressed, and you're cultivating the compassion to have the intention towards soothing or holding, literally holding, aren't you, and communicating and soothing somebody and enhancing their ability to have that compassionate motivation, that social motivation. And that's it's so fundamental to music therapy. That's what we teach. Is we do a lifespan approach where we start with the way we treat each other as musical beings and how that happens over lifespan. So my work's been working with 2-year-olds to 102-year-olds, with people with dementia, with strokes, with disabilities, head injuries, trauma, autism, and it's just coming back to the point that you made, that it's just everywhere. It's in the whole body. So you can do the trauma work, you can do the cognitive, you can do the emotional. You can go behind what's being presented. It's it's fascinating.
Of course, we also, we sort of play together, don't we, or we sing together.
Yeah.
And it's mentioned that social connection piece, I think, and there's nothing quite so thrilling in some ways as having 3 people who create a harmony. You know what I mean? Like that, it's just and suddenly we've made something. There's something of music, and it's a thrill, and it moves us. And I can't tell you the number of times a couple of my mates would sing Barbara Ann, by the Beach Boys. I used to have to do the high part for some reason. But
fantastic, well done.
But being able to sing together, powerful stuff. So connecting, moving, and there's joy, and there's kind of safeness, and there's warmth, and there's exhilaration. It can all be in there, can't it? With
That's it. I mean, when I was training, that they would say, just wait, Matt. What you're doing is great. It's good work. Just wait 10, 20 years time, and the evidence will come through. And it's really coming through now. With the ability to scan the brain, all the technology, all the research which is now coming through. Alan Shaw, Steve Porges, just to name a few. So we know. When there's a pulse, let alone harmony or melody, when there's pulse and everybody's pulsing together, coming back to that early childhood experience of music, when we're pulsing together, there's oxytocin release, and so you feel connected, you feel safe. And with the singing, that's a cue of safety. It's cue of safety to our infants, which are so fragile, aren't they, and vulnerable when they're born, that evolutionary-wise, we've had to take care of them, and the different harmonies, it's the relationship between the pitches, isn't it? So it's a multifaceted cultural experience of feeling, potentially very, very safe, very, very connected. And of course, that, as we know, that's in the affiliative system, isn't it? The attachment system then opens.
Yes.
And that's where it's, when you're open, then hopefully you're more open to compassion and for it to be flowing. Yeah.
It's I just suddenly, I don't really know why, but it flashed to mind. Remember that this is the other end of the spectrum. Remember the scene from Psycho where she's coming, or the baddie's coming, and it's sort of those screeching violins or something. It actually. And can you comment a bit about that too? This idea that
sure.
Music can trigger threat system, maybe, or set you
absolutely.
right. Yeah, but tell us a bit about your thoughts there.
Well, absolutely. So for many years, I mean, the founder of music therapy, Julia Alvin, in 1966, wrote about this. And so she noticed that when she was playing higher pitches, it would create a lot of anxiety in the people she was working with, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Like the pitches of the screeches as the knife goes through the shower curtain. It makes sense that our attachment system opens up, and it's triggered by sound. So there's something that needs to be attended to right now in order to survive. Attachment system. Where's the group? Where's mum? Where's dad? Not safety seeking, but security seeking. And then also on the other end of the frequency spectrum, you have the lower sound. So a sudden low sound would also, was observed by music therapists, that would create threat as well, because that's something you've got to attend to. Something big that I can't see is triggering. So you've got to be a little bit careful, with some of those lower tones and sudden noises. It's very, very frightening.
The higher tone is sort of the psycho scene, and then the lower tone is sort of the Jaws,
Yes, brilliant.
Lower tone where they're using exactly what you're saying. As a kind of a. I mean, music in movies is always fascinating, isn't it? Because you watch the movie without the music, and it's kind of like, oh, well, that's nothing. But then those sounds, and it really changes the whole emotional experience.
It really enhances it, doesn't it? For better or worse, for good or for ill. So fascinating.
When you work as a compassion-focused therapist, or bring that into your work along with your music and music therapy, like what would be, in a practical sense, the way that you integrate that into a session, maybe, or something like that?
There's lots of ways that music can enhance and develop compassion in clinical work. It can be through improvisation, making something up on the spot. It can be a composition. You're creating something, a song or a piece of music, some sort of composition. Or it could be a listening experience, or it could be any combination of those. A listening experience could be a familiar piece of music, Help by the Beatles or something, so those are the three sort of main ways. So improvisation, as we were saying before, it could be around tuning in. So it could be matching a child, just in the same way that a child might be on the table and they're reaching for their favourite food, and the mother goes like that. So they know the child knows that their mother is there inside their experience with the sound. And so it's that matching and improvisation is letting somebody know that you're there with them and that you're moving alongside them. So somebody has diagnosis of autism or a head injury, or somebody who's very, very hard to reach. That technique can be fantastic because it just lets somebody know that they're there, and they're the attachment system can then can feel secure base, and safe haven. Improvisation is great for dialoguing. You can have a conversation, an ebb and a flow of conversation, and unlike words, you can talk over people. You can have a dialogue between a group, and it work together. And in that way, like you're saying, with the harmony, it's the relationships between the people and the music. So the music itself is transferential. It creates relationship. So, if we're talking about moving into our affiliative, soothing social engagement system, then that's ideal for that, really. Composition is great. It's a real way of empowering people. There's somebody who's very who's really struggling with empowerment. They've had a very critical upbringing or an abuse or something. They can write it down. They can sing it out. It's something like that. It's very, very powerful. And also, the listening experience. So you could have some very, very soothing music. Go into soothing rhythm breathing. Relaxing, going into your parasympathetic system, and then listening to quite structured pieces of music, chosen pieces of music by the therapist. That's really interesting work. Or very, very familiar music like the Beatles or something. Somebody who has a diagnosis of dementia. Those longer term memories can then be experienced again, for better or worse. But you often hear about these tales, don't you, of people that are non-verbal, very insular, very going inside. They're deteriorating naturally, but also their emotional world, if they may be depressed, anxious. And then the music comes on and they start singing. These people can't talk. I mean, it's just incredible what music can do. Really incredible. So, yeah, those are some of the sort of techniques that a music therapist might use in the moment. Yeah.
Improvisation, composition, and listening. So what have been some of the real successes there for you? Any examples there of sort of the wins or successes where CFT and bringing music in has kind of like, that's been a very helpful.
Okay, so I've been working with a young woman, which is very, very unusual. I've been working with her for 10 years. And I don't think there's a lot written about, not research written about a long-term work. But she responds to music when she's very, very frightened. So she has a diagnosis of an intellectual disability. She also has a diagnosis of autism. And she has some fairly complex health needs. She regularly has UTIs, urinary tract infections. And the way she experiences those is that she's one of these people, it's not her fault. She hallucinates when it's not spotted. She finds it very difficult to communicate. I mean, she could probably point to where it hurts, but they're very, very subtle to spot. And so she's sort of grabbing at herself and things like that. And it's at those times when the music she gets it. She can move outside of the pain. All that sort of John Kabat-Zinn idea. You move outside. You can move in and out of it. It's not taking over. It's not overwhelming for her. So the flute is a very, very important instrument to her because it reaches her. Even though she might not come into the therapy space, I can leave the door open and play the flute, and the music carries to her, and she can start to soothe herself. So that sort of work is just incredible, because you think, well, that's the social engagement system coming online. This is somebody who's now much more aware, who can experience, and it must be terrifying for her. I mean, this is somebody who developmentally she's probably around 2, She's in her late 20s now, and understanding that. But then this music must just, I don't know how she experiences, but you can see her whole body relaxing. So something like that. And I mean, she's a great case study. Perhaps I should write this up, because she'll say music in the therapy. She calls it music in the therapy. I've never called it that. Nobody else around us calls it. She calls that music in the therapy. And she'll say, not my fault. It's not my fault. It's like, what? It's like somebody's been feeding her Paul Gilbert papers or something.
Yeah.
But she'll say it's not my fault, and it's helpful to talk in the third person with her autism. So you say, I won't say her name, but blah 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 blah. It's not your fault. And then you can see her whole body reflects. Oh, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. So over the 10 years we've been working on that. So that sort of, I find that really interesting, because I think it's a gap in CFT that hasn't really been researched, because we've got to be very critical of our work and think very carefully about it. And so for me, CFT, for it to work, it's got to have the theory of mind. You've got to be able to see, experience what it's like for somebody else, haven't you? For example, for the compassionate mind, you've got to have that theory of mind for the compassionate self, to be effective in an individual. And so, but she doesn't have a lot of that. So it's almost like it's pre CFT work. Yeah. So that's been fascinating to work with her. I learned a lot through that process. Yeah.
It's such a poignant example, because the woman does, she suffers and she experiences so much, and yet finds it difficult to really communicate that or express it in certain ways. And I know what you mean. The UTIs can really be very painful in a range of ways, can't they? And yet, whether it be physically painful or in terms of just people become very unwell when they have a UTI. And so, and yet, how do they get picked up? But the music, it's interesting because we think quite quickly in CFT about the use of imagery and creating an image of a compassionate other, for example. But that's just one of the ways in, actually, isn't it? Another way in a way that doesn't require verbalness, or it doesn't require even visualness, but maybe music is also. There's a musical sense of a compassionate other. It just floats in and creates a sense of companionship, a sort of a warmth, in a sense, something that's alongside me. And for her, it's the flute. The flute just floats out from the room or whatever, and it's like a compassionate other in sound, and a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting.
A little bit before words or before those sort of things. It comes in at that very fundamental level, because as you said right at the start, music is so fundamentally a part of humanity. I'm just going to spring this on you, and you can
go for it.
You certainly say no, but would you play us a little bit on?
Of course.
Just to give
us. Of course, I was just waiting for a little interjection to do something, so it's no problem at all. Yeah,
I would absolutely love it.
Yeah. So this is something that I might play to her, and it's interesting you say how you spot the UTIs, because no one else could do it, and that was part of my role. Part of the aims of the session was to spot when they happen, because imagine if you're hallucinating and you're terrified, your sense of self is going to be very different, and through the music I could sense, and through her body movements I could sense when that anxiety was there, and it was very, very subtle. So something, I think you're right. Maybe there's something about the compassionate other. So we could have a compassionate other type sound going out on the YouTube. To hear some flute.
Oh, that's so lovely. Oh, thank you very much. I adored the chance to listen to that and to see you do that, and I can totally see, or hear, perhaps is a better word, the way that would just come across, move through space towards her, and she would receive that, and also, I mean, obviously there's still the suffering perhaps, but there's just that sense of kind of the care and companionship there. Very, very beautiful.
Yeah, no mud, no lotus. That suffering is going to be there, isn't it? It's just how you work with that and how long it lasts. Yeah.
And you can
Perhaps
sort of
enhancing
imagine.
and developing the compassion helps.
Yes. You can sort of imagine the sound like that coming to someone, and they just, you could imagine some of that tension just easing, just even a little bit, and sort of connecting, differently with the moment.
And it works. Sorry to interrupt. It works for the therapist as well, because we're basically doing soothing rhythm breathing, but I'm extending my out breath. So my soothing system is just rock solid as well. So then you get the co-regulation, and just works.
Actually, I was interested about, obviously you play the flute and have long played the flute and so on. Is there anything there about, different instruments, or whether people have certain, I don't know, preferences even, or whether it just depends on the therapist themselves, or what are your thoughts there?
The instrument will dictate a lot of what can be expressed, and it's very hard to express perhaps anxiety on a drum or something like that. It's quite hard. But so people, people just have different sort of tastes and cultural norms, really. Certain chord sequences and harmonic sequences and meters and things. So, the Indian drums that I play, tabla, they are fantastic for very sort of serene, lively, exciting, exuberant sounds, but then can be very, very soothing as well. And then some people might not understand that sound so much. It might not resonate with them so much. So maybe the piano or guitar or the voice. Well, the voice is just so powerful. Like you're saying with the singing earlier, it's so powerful. There's no barrier. So it's often, the way in is with the voice. But people can, just with, they can have fears and blocks and resistances to the compassion that's coming up, that's emerging for them. So I work with children that just put their hands over their ears, because they can't have the compassion come in. So maybe try a different instrument, find something that they find safe.
You preempted my next question. I wondered whether you did find, challenges or perhaps even FBR type reactions to the musical side of things.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we work with, isn't it? That's a lot of the work that needs to be done, and you've got to do the work. But that's the thing, isn't it? You've got to do the work. So yeah, an awful lot of that. It's not a magic wand by any means. It's incredibly powerful, but sometimes people are very resistant to it. It's just to find different ways. It's always a risk. It's always a risk going into music as it is going into therapy. It's basically about fear, isn't it? That's what people come into therapy for, because they're scared, or someone else is scared and they've referred them. So as soon as there's this sensory experience of music, this emotional, motivating experience, then those fears will come up and people will stop playing, or they'll play louder, or they'll change instrument, or they won't bring their music in, or they'll put their fingers in their ears, or they'll start talking, or they'll so that it's just working with different ways of dealing with that, really. There's so many applications of that CFT are using, chair work, for example, that I don't think's really being used. I mean, you can put different sort of musical selves, and you can play angry self, anxious self, sad self, compassionate self. You could play those, and you could. There's so many creative ways of working. So it's just finding what fits.
I love seeing your mind at work there, the creativity with which you are approaching this whole sort of wonderful niche that you're developing. Something that really stood out to me just then, though, was that actually the fears box resistances might be about the music itself or the instruments, or I've certainly known of people who push back a bit about they don't really like the sound of classical guitar, for example, or something like that. But I think the other thing you said, which really is intriguing, is that the music is conveying the compassion, and it's actually the compassion that they're still fearful of. It's not so much literally the instrument or the music that's being played, and that's a really fascinating notion that the covering of the ears isn't just to cover the music, but is also fears, blocks, and resistances arising about receiving compassion and feeling exposed or vulnerable in because of their sort of experience of being cared for before and things like that.
Yeah,
that's really...
yeah, exactly. There's a lot about embodiment, really, that I think. I mean, in my work, historically, my work has been working with people that find language very difficult. So when I was training in the CFT course, I brought my flute out, and people I played to my cohort. I just said, look, you're doing a lot of talking here. This is my background is no talking at all. So what I learned from that was that it's it's a lot about the embodiment of compassion. If as therapists, you can move in with that embodiment. There's so much research about the embodiment of compassion, isn't there? That somehow that, and then that's in the co-regulation and the communication in those non-verbal micro skills.
What sort of current projects have you got on the go, or what sorts of things are you working on?
So I'm just about to release 4 pieces of music, which are called Future Self, and one of them is called Sympathy, Empathy, Distress Tolerance, and Non-Judgmental. If you can recognise some of those from the attributes of compassion. So these are, yeah, you recognise those, yeah. So these are, I'm designing pieces of music for practice, for compassionate mind training, for potentially clinical work if the therapist feels that that's safe and appropriate, for self-practice, self-care. So these are very specifically designed pieces of music to soothe or to stimulate or to evoke responses, appropriate responses. So that's coming out. I mean, there's obviously the teaching, which is ongoing, always creative and developing, and I attend a lot of the CFD groups, Toronto and Greece and Derby, and I run the 2016 alumni CFD training group, Nottingham group as well. So it's just that work. It's that work. Those are the sort of projects. Yes, it's ongoing composition and thinking, and so I'm very grateful for today and for meeting and discussing your ideas. That idea of the compassionate other in the music is great. I love that. I'm gonna run with that one, Stan. That's lovely. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah, are those, when you do release those pieces, will that be in a certain format, or can people access those somewhere?
Sure, you can search for compassionate music, compassionate musicians. You can Google that. Perhaps we could drop a link in the thing below, that people can access it. And it's just a little brief story. So in lockdown in the UK, processing that and the anxiety that was around, the sort of antidote to that was to do something altruistic, to do something without any something kind, something compassionate for people. That's the antidote to feeling anxious at that time. And I thought, well, I'm just going to create this website where I can upload my material, other people's material. We've got 20 or so tracks at the moment from professional musicians, but the intention, the thought behind the music must be compassionate. And anything, you can download it for free, and if you want to donate, you can. Any money that's donated goes straight into compassionate charities. So that's where it sort of grew from. There's all sorts of pieces of music on there that people can access, something very lively. There's a lot of joy and compassion, isn't there? It's so, it's a very sort of joyful pieces of music and very, very soothing pieces of music and practices with music. And people can contribute. Do get in touch with me, and we can, maybe somebody's got a piece of poetry and I can put some music to it, or somebody's got a practice they've got recorded they want music to, or they want to send me some of their compositions or something. We can, as long as it's got that creative sort of compassionate intention behind it, then it goes up and people can follow the site, and so you get the updates when they come through once every 2 weeks, once a month, something like that. Something new comes through.
Yeah, well, we will absolutely put the details of that in the description. I think I'll be jumping straight on there and checking it all out myself. One of the things, just before I let you go, that I was sort of asking everybody just to sort of see their 3 tips. So the idea here is as people begin or proceed on their own compassionate journey, what might be 3 tips that you'd sort of recommend in terms of helping them along the way?
I've had to think about this, and I think the first one is to remember that compassion is to put compassion into action. It's a doing. You must do the work, and that sort of ties into the next one, which is to practice. Do the practice and reflect on it, and go into that yourself. Perhaps the third one might be it just to remember that it's joyful too. And there's a lot of reflection, a lot of sort of navel gazing and distress tolerance and deep work. Wonderful. But also to remember it's very, very joyful too, and it can be very, very motivating. Let's do this. Let's do this compassion. It's great stuff. So those are my 3.
Yes. It's about action. So let's practice it and let's feel the joy. Well, that's wonderful, Matt. I'm so glad we had our chance to talk today, and lots of very stimulating ideas there. I'm certainly going to be, sort of thinking about, sort of my own relationship with music and where it might come more into my work as well. But anyway, yes, thank you very much for being in session.
Thank you so much, Stan. It's been great questions. It was such a pleasure talking with you. Yeah, wish you all the best.